Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into the murky world of Victorian hygiene, where soap was suspicious, bathwater was communal, and everyone kind of smelled like soup. Picture this. You step out of a steam train into a soot-cloaked London street. The fog is thick, but not the dreamy cinematic kind. No, this is coal smoke mixed with the scent of horse manure, fish guts, and something unidentifiably human. Your boots squelch in something you'd rather not identify, and within seconds, your nose is assaulted by a wall of odor that says, "Welcome to 19th century cleanliness." You make your way down the cobbled road. A cart rattles by, and the driver tips his hat, beneath which you notice is a layer of grime clinging to his face like it's auditioning for permanence. Children dart past, barefoot and giggling, their skin tanned by dirt more than the sun. Laundry flaps from windows above, but most of it hasn't seen a proper rinse in weeks. There's a small alley to your right. Don't go down it. That puddle isn't just water. And that smell? It's a charming mix of decaying vegetables, raw sewage, and the kind of sweat that only builds over days without washing. Here's a little reality check. If you were alive back then, your odds of surviving without contracting cholera, typhoid, or simply keeling over from your own body odor weren't great. In fact, if you've got a modern nose and modern expectations, you probably wouldn't survive this era of filth and funky crevices at all. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing the global sleep squad in action. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking. Through the clatter of hooves and the cries of street vendors, you catch a whiff of boiled cabbage, stale beer, and something alarmingly acidic. The city pulses with life, but under its corseted exterior lies a filthy secret. Hygiene, if it exists, is mostly decorative. The richer neighborhoods have cleaner facades, but don't let that fool you. Most homes still lack indoor plumbing. Privies, outdoor toilets are the norm, and they're shared between dozens of people. Water is precious, and heated water even more so. Soap? Expensive, and for some, suspiciously unnatural. You pass a woman in layers of petticoats. She looks regal, even graceful, until the breeze shifts and reveals the cloying perfume she's doused herself in. It's not just for style, it's for survival. That lavender isn't masking just sweat, it's hiding a cocktail of grime, mothballs, and last week's bath. And what a bath that would have been. One tub. Multiple people, often starting with the head of the household and working down to the children. Meaning, yes, by the time it's your turn, the water's gone gray and features a strange floating skin. Victorian cities are bustling, overcrowded, and woefully underplumbed. Most people live in tenements, cramped multifamily buildings with shared courtyards and barely ventilated rooms. One room for 5 people is common. 10 isn't unusual. You find yourself standing near a corner where a group of boys toss a leather ball. One scratches his head vigorously. Lice. Almost everyone has them. If you're lucky, you've got a bonnet or cap to hide the itching. If not, you pick, flick, and carry on. And while we're here, let's talk about hands. Look down at yours. They're probably stained with soot by now. There's no sanitizer, no soap dispenser on the wall. Hand washing is more of a vague aspiration than a routine. And unless you're about to dine with nobility, nobody expects you to bother. Butchers handle raw meat with bare hands and then touch everything else. Bakers knead dough with fingers blackened from coal stoves. And doctors, we'll get to them later, often move from patient to patient without washing a thing. Historians still argue whether the average Victorian truly knew how dirty they were, or whether they just accepted it as the natural order of things. Either way, your nostrils beg for mercy. Passing a bakery, the smell of fresh bread is a mercy. Brief, comforting, and completely at odds with the world around it. You take a deep breath, but a breeze brings the scent of the Thames instead, thick, brown, and swirling with everything from industrial dye to human waste. The river is as much a sewer as a waterway. People still wash clothes in it, some still drink from it, and some fall in. Let's not dwell. You notice a group of women scrubbing laundry on a communal board. Their hands are red and raw. Soap, when used, is often lye-based, harsh, corrosive, and unforgiving. No gentle chamomile-scented body wash here. If it burns your skin a bit, at least it's working, right? A passing gentleman tips his top hat. His coat is spotless, his shoes shined, but the collar of his shirt is yellowed, and his breath, when he opens his mouth to cough, is a cloud of stale air that could knock a horse unconscious. Victorian fashion hides a multitude of hygiene sins. Layers upon layers of fabric help trap body heat and odors. Corsets restrict movement, and underwear, if worn, is seldom washed thoroughly. But we'll get to all that. This is just the beginning. As your boots collect grime and your senses adjust or surrender, you begin to understand. In the Victorian world, being clean isn't about being sterile. It's about appearing less dirty than the person next to you. And in a city where the air itself feels like it's been steeped in sweat, coal, and despair, that's no small feat. You're still walking, but now you turn a corner and step into a much rougher part of town. The cobblestones here are more cracked, the puddles deeper and less trustworthy. This is where the working poor live. Factory workers, coal haulers, washerwomen, and chimney sweeps, packed into rows of brick tenements like sardines stacked vertically. The air is different here. Not just dirtier, more alive with human noise. Babies crying, boots stomping, dogs barking, men yelling over poker games. And underneath it all, a sour, yeasty undertone. The smell of bodies that haven't seen a proper bath in weeks. Or months. Sometimes more. You step into one of these homes, not because you're invited, but because the door doesn't shut properly and someone's tossed a half-broken chair in its path. Inside, the room is dim and low-ceilinged, warmed by a single coal stove that fills the air with smoke, heat, and the sharp scent of burning fuel. Clothes hang above it to dry, dripping soot-stained water into a cracked basin. There's no bathroom here. There's a chamber pot under the bed, or maybe in the hallway. And there are 5 people asleep in one room, limbs tangled, breaths mingling. You spot 2 children curled on a pile of old coats. One of them coughs in his sleep. The sound is wet and deep. You try not to imagine what he's inhaling day after day. Victorian slums weren't just unsanitary, they were hazardous to every sense. You brush against a wall and leave with a smudge of something dark on your sleeve. It could be soot. It could be mold. It could be yesterday's soup. You choose not to investigate. And you're not alone in this. Historians still argue whether these families were truly dirty by choice or simply had no alternatives. In truth, water was hard to come by. Clean water, nearly impossible. And privacy? Laughable. Baths, when taken, were a group activity. Sometimes people paid a few pennies to use a shared public bathhouse where dozens of strangers rotated through the same murky water until it resembled weak tea with mysterious floaters. If that sounds repulsive, congratulations. You're officially a modern human. You step outside again. Across the street, a young woman balances a bucket of water from the pump 2 blocks away. She walks carefully, her shoulders tense. If she spills even a little, she'll have to make the trip again. Water isn't just heavy, it's precious. The irony? Half of it is already contaminated by runoff from cesspools and gutters. And then there's the laundry. Washing clothes means hauling water, boiling it over a fire, scrubbing each piece by hand, and wringing them out until your fingers bleed. That's why most people wash only their underthings regularly, and even that's a stretch. Shirts, dresses, coats. You air them out and pray. You wander past a narrow alley. A man is relieving himself against the bricks. No one stops him. No one reacts. It's normal. It's expected. Public urination is one of the few things the city has space for. Behind him, a little girl drags a wooden toy along the filth-caked stones, giggling as if the ground weren't actively trying to give her a disease. Your stomach flips when a gush of slop sloshes down from a second-floor window above. Someone's emptied a chamber pot, or worse, a bucket of leftover bathwater. It lands with a splat. You jump back just in time. Another second and you'd be wearing it. "Watch yourself," someone shouts from above. A voice equal parts warning and indifference. It's the unofficial Victorian warning cry, like a reverse dinner bell. Look out below, but with more consequences. Back in the street, a cart rolls by, loaded with what looks like meat but smells like regret. The butcher's apron is stiff from use, stained in ways that suggest it's never met a laundry tub. He slices meat with fingers coated in something sticky. He licks one of them before giving change. And you wonder, how did anyone survive this? Well, many didn't. Child mortality was sky high. Cholera outbreaks swept entire neighborhoods. Typhoid made regular appearances. Tuberculosis was so common it was called consumption, as if people just accepted being slowly eaten from the inside. But perhaps the most common health hazard of all was poverty itself. Because without money, you had no access to whatever scraps of hygiene the era offered. You spot a woman emptying ashes from her fireplace. She's older, her back bent, her hands cracked and gray with coal dust. She doesn't wear gloves. No one does. She's dumping the ashes into a heap behind her home, where yesterday's trash, broken shoes, and kitchen slop already stew. It hits you. Everything is reused here. Rags for diapers, bones for broth, urine for laundry. Yes, really. The ammonia in stale urine was used as a primitive cleaning agent for clothes. It's called chamber lye. And it was a common sight in poorer areas. Buckets of week-old pee waiting to become a kind of soap substitute. You feel your jaw tighten. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you can still smell your modern laundry detergent. Lavender and lemon and promise. But here, you've got chamber lye and hard scrubbing, and a hope that you don't get chilblains from washing outdoors in winter. The funny thing? Despite all this, there's pride here. The families in these tenements do what they can. Mothers braid their daughters' hair in the morning. Boys polish their boots with spit before school. Someone ties a ribbon onto a cracked teacup. It's survival, but it's also dignity. You notice a line of freshly washed undergarments fluttering on a rope strung between two windows. They look clean, or cleanish. It's all relative. But in this world, even a flutter of white cotton against a smoky sky feels like a triumph. A street preacher shouts nearby, railing against sin and moral decay. But you wonder if he'd ever tried scrubbing his own robes in chamber lye. Probably not. His face is clean, though, and his beard smells vaguely of rose oil, probably borrowed from a wife or a benefactor. One last image before you move on. A boy, barefoot and grinning, offers you a shiny coin. He found it in the gutter. He doesn't realize, or maybe doesn't care, that it was probably dropped by someone mid-chamber pot disposal. He pockets it with pride. And you continue forward, stepping over yesterday's bathwater, trying not to breathe too deeply. Welcome to the working class of Victorian England, where survival is gritty, grimy, and just barely graceful. You've made it through the narrow alleys and past the soot-slick children. Now you're curious. If everything is this filthy, how often does anyone actually bathe? You follow the scent of old coal smoke and soapy steam to a public bathhouse. Not a spa, not even close, but one of the few places a Victorian family might go when the grime reaches crisis levels. The sign outside promises hot water for 2 pence and clean towels for hire. You step inside. It's steamy. Not the pleasant eucalyptus kind. This is more like the fog that gathers when someone boils cabbage too long in a sealed room. The air is thick with moisture, but also body odor, mildew, and the unmistakable tang of unwashed feet. You immediately begin to sweat, even though you haven't taken off a single layer. Along the tiled wall, you see a row of big wooden tubs. One family, huddled awkwardly in their underthings, is halfway through their turn. The water is not transparent. Brownish, cloudy, and suspiciously bubbly. The little boy giggles as he splashes his sister, who yelps and ducks under. The mother tries to scrub her hair with a lump of yellow soap. Her face unreadable. This is what passes for a proper bath, if you don't have a copper tub at home. And most don't. If you're middle class or wealthier, you might have one in your kitchen, dragged in when needed, filled by hand with boiling water from the stove, then cooled with water from the pump. It takes hours to prepare, so you don't do it often. A weekly bath is considered ambitious. Once every 10 days, pretty normal. And if it's midwinter, forget it. Heating water is expensive, fuel is precious, and standing naked in a cold house could mean catching a chill that turns into pneumonia. So sometimes, the better option is simply not bathing at all. Historians still argue whether Victorian people truly believed this lack of washing was healthy, or whether they just had no better option. But there was a common idea floating around. Too much bathing could weaken the body, open the pores to disease, or even cause madness. And so, the fewer baths, the better, especially for women and children. At home, when bathing does happen, it's often a family affair. One tub, one room, one by one. The father first, he's the breadwinner, after all. Followed by the mother, then the children, youngest to oldest. By the time the last child climbs in, the water is murky, greasy, and cold. That child may or may not be you. You could almost feel it, your toes curling against the slimy bottom of the tub, your nose wrinkling as you lower yourself into the tepid, used-up water. And don't expect shampoo or bubbles. You're scrubbing yourself with coarse lye soap, the kind that stings if you have a cut. There's no conditioner, no loofah, just a rough cloth, elbow grease, and the hope that this all somehow makes you cleaner. Occasionally, people try to freshen up between baths. They use cloths dipped in vinegar or dab lavender water behind the ears. Some brave souls rub themselves with alum blocks or sprinkle talcum powder under the arms. But these are just band-aids on a very sweaty wound. There's also the infamous dry wash. You dab a cloth in cologne or alcohol, wipe your neck and wrists, and call it good. Your skin still smells like yesterday's stew, but now it has a faint top note of gin. Outside the bathhouse, you pass a row of laundresses boiling water in huge vats. They stir with long wooden paddles, arms muscled from years of hauling, scrubbing, and wringing. Bathing might be rare, but laundry is worse. It's back-breaking work, and most people don't do it themselves unless they absolutely have to. So underthings are washed more regularly, but outer garments? Not unless they smell like an open sewer. And even then, maybe not. And for those truly too poor or too proud to bathe, there's always perfume. Or for men, a generous splash of bay rum. And let's be honest, it only masks the odor for so long. One fringe method of staying clean, if you can call it that, involves sweating it out. The Turkish bath craze reached England in the mid-1800s, promising detoxification through steam and scrubbing. Think saunas with brutal exfoliation. Some found it invigorating, others passed out. You walk past a perfumery. The scent of roses, ambergris, and lavender pours through the window like a dream. You step inside, grateful for the olfactory relief. Bottles of scent line the walls, and the shopkeeper greets you with a powdered smile. But don't be fooled. This isn't about smelling good. It's about not smelling bad. And it's not cheap. A vial of real perfume might cost more than your weekly wages, so you don't buy it. You just linger in the doorway for a moment longer, letting the floral fog cling to your coat before you head back out into the world of boiled onion and burning coal. Victorian society developed a kind of olfactory hierarchy. The poor smelled like work, sweat, dirt, and cooked cabbage. The middle class tried to smell neutral, soap maybe, or starch. And the rich, they smelled like powder, musk, and luxury. The more layers you wore, both physically and socially, the less people questioned your scent. But even wealth couldn't guarantee actual hygiene. You could wear silk and pearls and still only bathe once a week. or once a month. Sometimes not at all. You might dust yourself with rice powder and believe that's the same as washing. Or you'd sit in a lavender-scented parlor and read about the latest medical fear. That water, too often used, might strip the skin of its natural defenses. In a few fashionable circles, there were even beliefs that natural oils, yes, the very oils that now have you reaching for your 3-step skincare routine, were a sign of health. Shiny, greasy skin? Just nature doing her work. Don't mess with it. And of course, for the very unlucky, there was the issue of sharing. Sharing beds, sharing towels, sharing hairbrushes. You don't have your own bathroom, because your house doesn't even have one. So you share and hope. Hope you don't catch lice. Hope no one has a skin infection. Hope that what you wipe off is yours and not somebody else's. You leave the bathhouse district behind, stepping once again into the clammy dusk. The light is fading. You pass a boy with a pail, water sloshing as he walks. You wonder if it's for drinking or bathing, or both. As you turn another corner, your skin feels sticky. Your collar is damp, and you suddenly realize you haven't bathed either. You too are a bit Victorian now. You're not proud of it, but oddly, you feel like you belong. And so with a damp shirt, a nose full of coal dust, and the distant sound of someone pouring something unspeakable into the gutter, you keep walking. You've seen the grime on their clothes, felt the sticky air of the bathhouse, and dodged a few too many buckets of mystery liquid in the streets. But now, as you find yourself following the echo of a street vendor calling out fresh apples 2 each, something else catches your attention, something far more intimate. Someone smiles at you, and it hits you. The breath, it's powerful. Welcome to the world of Victorian dental hygiene, or rather, the wild, lawless frontier of its absence. The man with the friendly smile is missing 3 teeth. The ones he does have are yellow, a little green, and all the wrong shapes. You watch as he takes a bite of his apple and winces. That tooth? Probably just met its final meal. He spits a seed into the gutter, and you swear you can hear it hiss as it lands. Toothbrushing, you'll be relieved, or maybe horrified to learn, was a thing. Sort of. But it depended heavily on class, money, and sheer motivation. A toothbrush in the 1800s might be made from bone or wood, with bristles pulled from pig hair or horse mane. Sometimes they were just cloths dipped in salt or soot. Yes, soot, as in fireplace ash. The idea was that the gritty texture would scrub off the film and food. In reality, it just eroded enamel and made your mouth taste like a chimney. Tooth powder was all the rage. Mixtures of chalk, ground-up shells, baking soda, or even crushed brick, sometimes flavored with peppermint oil, if you were fancy. If not, you were spitting blood and bits of brick into the basin every morning, thinking, yes, I am doing hygiene correctly. Historians still argue whether brushing teeth daily was truly common among the working class, or whether it was more of an upper-class aspiration. But one thing is clear. Bad breath wasn't just a personal problem, it was society-wide. Imagine talking to someone in close quarters. No deodorant, no soap, and now no dental routine to speak of. It's a trifecta of misery for your nostrils. And don't even ask about flossing. It didn't exist. You continue walking through a marketplace. A woman sells sweets from a cart, sticky toffee, hard candies, treacle fudge. Children buy them eagerly, sugar sticking to every crevice in their already decaying molars. Dentistry as we know it hasn't caught up yet, and most children have rotting teeth before they reach adolescence. You peek into a barbershop. It's empty, save for the barber himself, polishing his tools by gaslight. You notice something shiny on the wall, a set of long, frightening metal implements. He sees your glance and smiles proudly. Oh, those? For extractions, he says. You nod politely, but your insides scream. Barbers back then doubled as amateur dentists. Need a tooth pulled? He'll do it. No anesthesia. Just a shot of whiskey, a few strong lads to hold you down, and a yank. Maybe 2 yanks. If the root snaps, you're in for an evening of unforgettable regret. Painkillers? Not really. There's laudanum, basically opium in a bottle, and if you've got money or a generous friend, you might dull the pain for a while. But infections? Oh yes, those are a frequent encore. And with no antibiotics, a simple abscess could spiral into a deadly fever. You pass a group of children playing near a pump, their laughter echoing off the brick walls. One girl has blackened stumps where her front teeth used to be. It doesn't seem to bother her. She grins anyway. That's just how things are. And if you're lucky enough to keep most of your teeth, well, you might have a mouth full of metal fillings, but not the kind you're used to. These are hammered in by hand, sometimes made of lead or mercury. Yes, mercury. Because why not add a little poison to your smile? You reach the edge of the market and pause at a small shop, Apothecary and Curiosities. Inside, shelves are lined with glass bottles and handwritten labels. Tooth elixir, odor-neutralizing powder, essence of clove. The shopkeeper greets you with an eager nod. He offers a sample of his newest concoction, a paste made from burnt bread, vinegar, and crushed mint. He calls it Bright Smile. You take a sniff. It smells like someone set a salad on fire. But in a world of soot and sulfur, it's probably the closest thing to a minty fresh moment you'll get. Curiously, some remedies for bad breath involve chewing on herbs, parsley, sage, and fennel seeds. Others swore by rinsing with vinegar or even brandy. And there were those who believed the key to oral hygiene was in not brushing at all so as not to loosen the teeth. You can't help but chuckle. There's a kind of tragic optimism in it. Maybe if I leave them alone, they'll stay put. Spoiler, they did not. At this point, you're hyper-aware of your own mouth. Your tongue feels dry. You start to imagine the taste of soot, the clink of bone-handled toothbrush on crooked teeth, the dull throb of an inflamed molar. You glance at a baker pulling fresh loaves from the oven and think, crusty bread, delicious, but also a dental death sentence in this era. And the irony? Victorians loved sweets. Sugar was increasingly accessible thanks to colonial imports, and desserts became a staple of every class, from boiled puddings in the slums to delicate tarts in drawing rooms. But the price was paid in molars and misery. Even the upper class wasn't spared. Queen Victoria herself had dental issues, reportedly losing several teeth and having a famously sensitive mouth. Royal dentists were sworn to secrecy, but the rumors spread like tooth decay. You pass a churchyard where a few children kick a ball made from rags. One boy sneezes violently and winces. That sneeze may have just dislodged a tooth. He picks something small and white from his hand and shoves it in his pocket, unfazed. Dental care wasn't just neglected, it was feared. The sound of a dentist's drill, if you were unlucky enough to find one who had such a contraption, was a thing of nightmares. The whirring, the smell of burning bone. Yes, bone burns was enough to make most people avoid it altogether. So instead they chewed cloves, they drank gin, they hoped the pain would stop. And if not, they learned to live with it, or die from it. You finally make your way past the last vendor stall. A man with suspiciously perfect teeth grins at you and offers a sample of tooth coal, a trendy new powder made from charcoal. You politely decline. Charcoal or not, your teeth are aching just from observing all this. And as you duck into a quieter street, the echoes of blackened smiles and bone-handled brushes follow you. Congratulations, you've survived a Victorian smile, or at least walked among them. Your feet carry you past the broken cobblestones and chamber pot gutters toward another pressing question. If bodies are rarely bathed and teeth are hanging on for dear life, what about hair? You glance at a group of women gathered by a fountain, their bonnets secured tightly, strands peeking out in a frizzy, slightly oily halo. You try not to stare, but you're realizing quickly, this isn't just a bad hair day. It's a way of life. Victorian hair hygiene was complicated. For starters, people didn't wash their hair often. Not because they were lazy, but because washing it was considered risky, wasteful, or downright dangerous. And that wasn't just superstition. Washing your hair could involve hauling water, heating it for hours, and using whatever soap or powder you had lying around, which may or may not burn your scalp. So instead, they didn't. Weeks could pass, sometimes months. Hair was brushed, fluffed, braided, and pinned, but rarely scrubbed. Instead of shampoo, many used dry washes, a dusting of cornstarch, ground iris root, or even powdered charcoal. These were meant to absorb oil, then be brushed out. Sort of like dry shampoo, if your dry shampoo came with a side of soot. You spot a young woman brushing her hair in a second-floor window. Her brush looks like it's made of ivory, the bristles stiff and worn. She's going at it like her life depends on it, which in some way it does. Victorians believed that vigorous brushing, ideally 100 strokes a day, would redistribute the scalp's natural oils and promote healthy, shiny locks. Historians still debate whether this method did more harm than good. Yes, brushing spread oils, but it also spread lice. And if you had dandruff, scabs, or worse, well, tough luck. There weren't medicated shampoos or antifungal creams. You just kept brushing and hoped it resolved itself, or didn't get worse. As you pass a barbershop, a boy sits in the chair, looking terrified. The barber pulls out a pair of shears, slick with yesterday's work. Boys' heads were often shaved short, especially in poorer families, not for style, but to keep lice at bay. It was easier to delouse a bald head than to comb through thick, tangled hair while trying not to cry. And lice were the great equalizer. Rich or poor, city or country, if you had hair, you probably had company. There were no over-the-counter treatments, no tea tree oil. People tried combing with fine-toothed metal tools or dousing their heads with kerosene, vinegar, or mercuric chloride. Yes, again with the poison. And if all else failed, you simply learned to live with the itch. You take a turn and end up in front of a wig maker's shop. The sign reads, "Hair pieces for ladies and gentlemen." And inside you spot a wall of wigs, powdered, curled, pinned. You might think wigs had gone out of fashion by the Victorian era, and you'd be half right. The towering white powdered styles of the Georgian period were fading, but hair pieces, still wildly popular, especially among women. You pass a lady on the street with a chignon the size of a cat perched on her head. You stare a moment too long. She glares. Is it her hair? Probably not. Victorian women often collected the hair from their hairbrushes and saved it in something called a hair receiver, a dainty little jar kept on the vanity. After gathering enough, they'd stuff it into nets or use it to pad out their hairstyles. It was like a homemade extension kit, equal parts clever and unsettling. And yes, there were full wigs too. If your hair started thinning or disappeared entirely thanks to illness or age, you simply covered it. Some pieces were made from real human hair, sold by desperate women, or scavenged from brush bins. Others were made from horsehair or wool. You can guess how comfortable that was. And let's not forget the pomades. Men used pomade like it was going out of fashion. Heavy, greasy mixtures made of bear fat, beeswax, and oil, scented with rose or citrus to mask the animal smell. It gave hair that slick, glistening look, perfect for shaping into fashionable curls or side parts. And if you've ever wondered what happens when you sleep with that much grease on your scalp, well, let's just say Victorian pillows were not white for long. Even women, especially in the upper class, used oils and pomades. Rosemary, castor oil, and macassar oil were all popular, meant to soften hair and encourage growth. So popular, in fact, that homeowners started putting cloths, called anti-macassars, over the backs of chairs to protect them from greasy heads. It's both charming and horrifying. You'd visit someone's parlor, lean back in a plush velvet chair, and leave a shimmering patch behind, like a snail trail, but fashionable. You pause near a boarding house and watch a young man leaning over a bucket, trying to rinse his scalp. His face contorts. Whatever he's using stings. Maybe it's vinegar. Maybe it's urine. Yes, again. Some believed aged urine helped with dandruff and scalp infections. And if you just made a face, congratulations. you are not Victorian enough yet. There's also a fringe practice called hair toning using soot or ash. Women with dark hair might rub fireplace ash into their roots to deepen the color. Blondes, meanwhile, were stuck. Bleaching agents were dangerous and often left the hair brittle or greenish. So, they powdered or wore bonnets and accepted that sunshine might turn their hair a little less golden and a little more haystack. And for those with curly or textured hair, Victorian beauty standards weren't kind. Curls were fashionable, as long as they were controlled. Dainty ringlets pinned just so. Anything unruly was brushed flat, greased down, or hidden under hats. You pass a millinery shop filled with feathered hats, lace caps, and hairnets. Women didn't leave home bareheaded, not just for style, but because head coverings helped hide the days or weeks between washes. Bonnets were the original dry shampoo, functional, discreet, and socially necessary. You pause for a moment, standing between two worlds. Behind you, a woman plaits her daughter's hair with meticulous care, picking at her scalp with practiced fingers. Ahead, a group of young men joke as they comb grease into their side parts, the air thick with the scent of lemon oil and sweat. It's all a balancing act, between cleanliness and appearances, between what society demands and what the body can endure. And your own scalp itches now, just thinking about it. You're now fully immersed in the Victorian world. One itchy scalp, one vinegar breath, and one mysterious brown bath at a time. But just when you think you've wrapped your head around their hygiene rituals, you notice something peculiar. Despite all the filth and infrequent washing, many Victorians manage to look tidy, put together, elegant even. Which brings us to a strange paradox of the era. Their clothes often looked better than they smelled. You stop to admire a group of children standing in line outside a charity school. They're wearing stiff collars and buttoned jackets, skirts with aprons, and carefully tied bows. The fabric's faded, sure, but from a distance it all seems quite respectable. But as you step closer, a sour, slightly musty odor wafts your way. Welcome to the world of semi-clean clothing. In Victorian England, people didn't wash their outer garments often. Not because they didn't want to, but because washing them was a massive ordeal, and often risked ruining the fabric entirely. Washing machines didn't exist yet. Laundering a dress or suit meant scrubbing by hand, boiling huge vats of water, hauling tubs back and forth, wringing fabric dry, and hoping the dyes didn't run. Even worse, wool and linen could shrink or warp, while dyes might fade or stain. So, unless your clothes were visibly filthy or smelled truly awful, you avoided washing them altogether. Instead, Victorians turned their attention to the layer closest to the body: undergarments. That's where the real action happened. Chemises, drawers, petticoats, undershirts, and linen collars were changed regularly and washed more frequently. These items absorbed the sweat, oils, and grime from the body. In theory, this kept the outer garments cleaner for longer. In reality, it meant your underwear was doing some very heavy lifting. And there was a lot of underwear. Women wore multiple layers beneath their dresses, starting with a chemise, then drawers, then corsets, petticoats, and sometimes crinolines or bustles. Men wore long cotton or woolen undergarments, often called combinations. All of it meant to protect their precious outer layers from the mess of their own flesh. You pass a laundry yard where clothes flap from a dozen lines, steam curling from a fire-heated cauldron. A woman wrings out a pair of bloomers and slaps them against a stone. Children dart around her, one of them waving what appears to be a freshly washed sock like a flag of victory. Washing underthings wasn't pleasant. It involved lye, boiling water, and the kind of scrubbing that left your knuckles raw. But it was essential, because if you didn't wash those, well, you'd end up with sores, rashes, or worse. And yet, even with this emphasis on underclothes, laundry days were spaced out. Maybe once a week, maybe every two. In poorer homes, once a month wasn't unheard of. You wore your chemise until it could walk on its own, and only then, maybe, did it see the inside of a washtub. Historians still discuss whether the average Victorian truly thought of cleanliness in layers. Some argue they believed that as long as the underlayer was fresh, the outer layer could be forgiven. Others suggest that appearance was prioritized over hygiene. In either case, laundering was strategic, smart, selective. You stroll through a fabric shop, eyeing bolts of muslin and cotton, the kinds of fabric used for these underlayers. A woman fingers a piece of lace, sniffing it subtly before nodding in approval. Even clean-looking fabric might have absorbed the city's ever-present fog of coal smoke and body odor. And this brings us to one of the stranger realities of the era. People often smelled like their wardrobes, not in the pleasant modern sense of linen fresh, more like a combination of dust, lye soap, and 10,000 hours of human wear. Even new clothes didn't stay crisp for long, especially in cities like London or Manchester, where pollution seeped into every fiber. You notice a man walking down the street in a dark frock coat. His trousers are creased, boots polished, cravat neatly tied. But his cuffs, grimy, his collar, yellowed. These were detachable, meant to be laundered and swapped out without cleaning the entire shirt. It was one of the few clever hygiene hacks of the era, but only if you remembered to change them. Not everyone did. A fringe trick among the truly fastidious was to sprinkle powdered starch or talcum on collars and cuffs between washes. It gave the illusion of freshness and made everything just a little more crunchy. Then there was brushing, lots of brushing. Clothes were brushed daily to remove surface dust, food crumbs, and dandruff. A good stiff clothing brush was considered as essential as a toothbrush, arguably more so based on what we've learned so far. And don't forget about airing out. People hung their clothes near windows or fireplaces, hoping the breeze or the smoke would mask whatever had begun to fester in the fabric. You might also hang a sachet of dried lavender or herbs in your wardrobe, the Victorian version of a Glade plug-in. You pass a woman sweeping the steps of her boarding house, stopping to shake out a blanket from a second-story window. Dust rains down like gray snow. You step aside just in time. She gives you a look that says, "What did you expect? This is routine. This is maintenance. This is survival." And speaking of blankets, bedding was another battlefield. Mattresses were stuffed with straw or horsehair and rarely cleaned. Sheets were washed more often, but still not frequently enough. Bedbugs were rampant. So were fleas. You didn't just sleep with your family. You slept with an ecosystem. Still, appearances mattered. A well-pressed dress, a carefully tied cravat, a clean-looking handkerchief, all sent a signal. Even if your chemise hadn't been washed since last Michaelmas, if you looked respectable, society gave you a pass. There's a kind of dignity in that. In making do. In scrubbing what you can, brushing off what you can't, and stepping out into the world with your collar straight and your hat tilted just right. Even if your socks could probably stand up by themselves. As you turn down a quieter street, the smell of boiled soap fades, replaced by the crisp bite of coal smoke and a faint note of lavender. You see two girls skipping rope in nearly matching dresses. Their hems are stained, their sleeves worn thin, but their ribbons are tied with care. And you realize something. Victorian cleanliness wasn't about being clean. It was about doing your best to seem that way, with the tools you had, in the world you lived in. And if that meant perfumed underarms, starched collars, and bloomers that could double as armor, so be it. You're getting used to the sensory onslaught now. The blend of body odor, coal smoke, and questionable perfumes no longer makes you flinch. Just twitch a little. But just when you think you've gotten a grasp on the rules of Victorian cleanliness, you step into a puddle and realize that wasn't rainwater. Because here's the next thing they didn't exactly master: human waste management. You step carefully through a narrower alley where the buildings seem to lean in on you, like they're whispering secrets about what's lurking in the shadows below. And those secrets? They involve urine, feces, and the occasional unfortunate rat floating downstream. Victorian city streets, especially in the earlier part of the 19th century, were as much toilets as they were thoroughfares. People dumped their waste directly into the streets, into ditches, into the Thames, or sometimes, if you were a little more refined, into a designated cesspool in the backyard. And here's the kicker. This wasn't unusual. It was daily life. You pass a row of modest townhomes. Outside, a man is rinsing a bucket. You pause, and he gives you a sheepish look. "Chamber pot," he mutters. Of course. The chamber pot, every household had one. Usually porcelain, sometimes metal, occasionally just a bucket. It lived under the bed or behind a screen and served as the in-home toilet for anyone too modest or too sleepy to venture outside at night. Come morning, someone, usually a maid, a child, or the least powerful member of the household, was tasked with emptying it. If the home had a backyard privy or a cesspit, that's where it went. If not, out the window. And this is where things get fun. Because that classic stereotype of people dumping chamber pots onto the street with a hearty "Gardaloo," totally real, especially in cities like Edinburgh and London. Gardaloo came from the French garder l'eau, meaning watch out for the water, though in this case it was more watch out for the biohazard. You hear it now. A second-story window creaks open. A slosh, a splash, shriek from someone caught unaware. It's all part of the rhythm of the street. Historians still argue whether sanitation laws were actually enforced or just politely ignored by officials overwhelmed by the sheer volume of urban waste. London, for example, had rudimentary regulations, but with thousands of homes and no organized waste collection, enforcement was laughable. You pass a group of children splashing sticks in a shallow puddle. You say a quiet prayer that it's only rain. The children don't seem to care either way. And remember, not every home had a privy. Even shared outhouses, wooden shacks over holes in the ground, were a luxury in some places. In the worst slums, families might share a single outhouse with 30 or more people. It wasn't cleaned, it wasn't ventilated, and it wasn't optional. Some landlords just didn't bother providing any facilities at all. The assumption, tenants could fend for themselves. Which they did, with buckets, newspaper, and a healthy sense of resignation. You turn a corner and find yourself near a tenement yard. The smell hits you before you see it. Sour, pungent, and so thick it seems to cling to your tongue. Flies buzz. A woman drags a sloshing pail toward the alley's edge and dumps it into a pit surrounded by crumbling brick. This, dear listener, is a cesspit, essentially a giant hole in the ground where all the household's waste collects. And unlike a modern septic system, these weren't sealed, they weren't ventilated, and they didn't drain, they just filled up, slowly, horrifically. Eventually, someone had to deal with them, but we'll get to those brave souls later. You step back from the pit, nose wrinkling. You hear coughing in the distance, a wet, rattling cough that seems all too common here. And it's no wonder. With waste sitting in open pits, soaking into the soil, and running through the gutters, the city was a perfect breeding ground for disease. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery. They weren't rare, they were part of the landscape. You could catch a life-ending illness just by living within smell distance of the wrong alley. And still, life went on. People swept their stoops, children played tag, vendors shouted prices over the stench. You marvel at the human ability to adapt, to normalize the unbearable. Just then, a cart rattles past, pulled by a horse whose tail flicks lazily at flies. The cart leaves behind a steaming pile. Nobody flinches. A man with a broom appears moments later, sweeping it into the gutter with practiced indifference. This too was a part of life. Horse droppings, dog droppings, human droppings. It all ran together into the same grimy stream. The gutters, or kennels as they were sometimes called, lined both sides of the street and funneled waste into storm drains, which ultimately emptied into rivers, including the Thames, which people still drank from. You pause and imagine it. boiling in the sun, thick with human waste and dead fish, and still somehow considered a water source. In the summer of 1858, the river got so foul, so absolutely unbearable, that Parliament actually shut down. They called it the Great Stink. You give yourself a moment to appreciate modern plumbing. Then you step aside as another person dumps a bucket's worth of something unidentifiable into the gutter. It trickles slowly downhill, joining a stream of soapy dishwater, gray suds, and if you're guessing correctly, something biological. As you walk farther down the street, the smell begins to fade, replaced by the sharper scent of coal smoke and tobacco. But the memory lingers. And so does the question, where exactly did all that waste go? Surely it wasn't always someone's job to toss it out the window, right? You'll find out soon enough. But for now, your boots squelch in the damp earth as you pass by yet another window. This one cracked open just wide enough for someone to pour out their morning shame. And you think to yourself, with no small amount of wonder, in a world where chamber pots live under the bed, where gutters run brown, and where every street carries the whiff of yesterday's dinner and this morning's bodily functions, it's a miracle anyone had an appetite at all. The further you go, the more you start to realize the real unsung heroes of Victorian hygiene weren't the ladies scrubbing bloomers in boiling lye, nor were they the boys with buckets or the maids discreetly sprinkling lavender water under their mistress's arms. No, the true MVPs of this era, those with stomachs stronger than iron and noses long past caring, were the night soil men. You find yourself in a quieter part of the city now. The bustle has died down. It's dusk. Lamps are being lit with long poles and flickers of flame. Chimneys puff smoke into the amber sky. And with the dark comes a different kind of activity. One you were never meant to see. A man in a brown waistcoat emerges from a gate carrying a long-handled shovel. His boots are caked in something that definitely isn't mud. He doesn't greet you. He barely acknowledges your presence. He just trudges past with the slow, inevitable rhythm of someone who's about to spend their evening knee-deep in humanity's leftovers. This is a night soil man. Back in the early 1800s, before widespread plumbing, homes and buildings collected their waste in cesspools, big smelly holes dug beneath or behind the house. And when those filled up, which they always did, someone had to remove the contents. But this wasn't a job for just anyone. It was a specialized profession. You had to be strong, efficient, and almost entirely immune to shame. You also had to work at night, hence the name, night soilmen. You follow at a distance, curious and just morbid enough to want to see what comes next. The man meets two others at a small courtyard behind a row of houses. They lift the heavy lid of a stone-lined pit, and then buckets, shovels, sloshing. A rhythmic scraping sound that could haunt your dreams. There was an entire industry built around this job. Night soilmen were often paid by the pail, and while the work was degrading and revolting, it could actually be somewhat profitable, if you didn't mind the eternal stench and occasional risk of falling in. Historians still debate whether these workers were respected as essential laborers or reviled as untouchables. Some communities appreciated them. Others forced them to enter only through back alleys and made them sleep outside city limits. What's undeniable is the fact that without them, Victorian cities would have drowned in their own filth. And that almost happened more than once. You cover your mouth as the smell creeps toward you. There's something ancient and sour about it, like rot and fermentation had a child. One of the workers wipes his brow, the other lights a pipe, completely unbothered. You suppose after a while the worst part of the job is everyone else's reaction. In some places, especially rural towns or less populated areas, night soil wasn't just collected, it was reused. Yes, you heard that right. Night soil was sometimes sold as fertilizer. And before you recoil, remember, they didn't have chemical fertilizers. They had what they had. And if your crop yield depended on something a little squishy and deeply unpleasant, you made it work. Of course, this led to some rather tragic side effects. Improperly composted human waste spread disease through crops and contaminated wells. It took years, decades really, before people connected the dots. Before germ theory started to whisper, hey, maybe we shouldn't eat lettuce grown with cholera. You walk past a stable and a man calls to you from the shadows. Looking for work? He asks with a grin. You shake your head. He chuckles. Didn't think so. No one ever is. Pays better than clerking, though. And he's right. Night soil men often earned more than factory workers. They could even unionize. Well, in a manner of speaking. They set their own rates, kept their own hours. Some had exclusive contracts with entire neighborhoods. But the social cost was steep. No one invited a night soil man to dinner, and understandably so. Even after a wash, if they bothered, these men carried the scent of their trade like a second skin. Their boots left prints in hallways. Their coats had a certain hue. You pause beside a shop window where a dressmaker is pinning lace onto a gown. Her hands are delicate, her eyes focused. The world of taffeta and silk seems galaxies away from what's happening just a block behind you. But this is the Victorian paradox, isn't it? The delicate and the disgusting sharing the same air. Perfume bottles sold on shelves above chamber pots. Hair tonics displayed beside buckets of quicklime. Lace gloves worn by hands that had to swat away flies on the way to tea. At the edge of the square, you notice a newer building, taller, made of pale stone. It has something different. A pipe. A real gleaming drain pipe leading from the side of the house into the ground. Could it be? Plumbing. Real plumbing. You move closer. The house is clearly owned by someone wealthy. Perhaps a banker or a politician. The pipe leads into a rudimentary sewer system, a marvel of engineering at the time. These systems were rare, expensive, and mostly limited to the upper classes in the mid-1800s. But their existence marked a turning point. You're witnessing the early days of the sanitation revolution. Engineers like Joseph Bazalgette in London would later design massive underground sewer networks, transforming cities and saving lives. But right now, in this moment, it's still a novelty, still a privilege. For most Victorians, waste management is a matter of luck, location, and which way the wind blows. You walk on, feet heavy with the weight of the evening. Somewhere behind you, the night soil men are finishing up. The buckets clank, the lids scrape closed. The work is done, for now. And tomorrow, they'll do it all again. You pass another house and hear the unmistakable sound of a chamber pot being emptied from an upstairs window. You quicken your step. The city is quiet now. The gas lamps flicker, and as you glance up at the stars, just barely visible through the smoky haze, you think, it takes a special kind of strength to walk these streets, to live in this balance of rot and refinement, to carry on while everything around you tries to make you sick. But they did. Every day, with a bucket in one hand and a prayer in the other. You're walking again, carefully, slowly, because the night has fallen and the streets aren't exactly what you'd call pedestrian-friendly. There are no street sweepers humming along, no cozy corner trash bins, just cobblestones, shadows, and the lingering memory of what you just witnessed being scooped from the earth. And as you look up at the row of homes lining the street, you notice something peculiar. Some of them have privies tucked away in tiny backyards, little outhouse-looking things built from wood or crumbling brick. Others don't. And those that do aren't necessarily better off, because the next leg of your journey brings you face to face with one of the least discussed and most explosive elements of Victorian hygiene: privies, cesspits, and the occasional spontaneous toilet disaster. You duck into a narrow alley between two houses. There, half hidden in shadow and ivy, is a wooden door slightly ajar. Inside is a single seat, cut into a plank, dark stains trailing from the corners of the pit beneath. The smell hits before you can step inside, earthy, sour, and eye-watering. This is a backyard privy, The standard toilet for most working and lower middle-class homes. A hole in the ground, sometimes lined with brick or wood, sometimes not. Occasionally there's sawdust. More often, just hope. You glance around. There's no lock on the door, no ventilation, no light. Just the faint buzz of flies and the ominous squelch of something moist underfoot. Privies were supposed to be emptied regularly. Supposed to be. But in reality, they filled up quickly, especially in densely packed neighborhoods. And when they weren't emptied, or when the weather turned rainy and the pits overflowed, well, let's just say the phrase wading through it stops being metaphorical. You continue walking and catch sight of a faded chalkboard sign posted near a cluster of homes. Notice, privy access after sundown only. It's a measure of modesty. Many houses shared one or two privies among several families, meaning privacy was non-existent and schedules had to be negotiated or shouted about over dinner. And if you think that's awkward, imagine being the one responsible for cleaning it. There were two main options. You could hire a night soil man. Or, and this was more common than you'd like to imagine, you waited until the pit was full and simply built a new one. Often just a few feet over. Sometimes people covered the old one with planks and planted flowers on top. Yes, that's what you're thinking. Those roses in front of the house, a little too vibrant. You pass a tenement building where you overhear a woman complaining to her neighbor. "It's the third time this year it's backed up into the cellar," she says. "I can't keep bleaching the floor if it's going to keep rising." Backed up? Into the cellar? Yes, because not all cesspits were outdoors. In some houses, particularly older ones, the waste collection area was under the home. Imagine a basement filled with human waste that slowly seeps through cracks in the floorboards. And when the gas builds up enough, it explodes. That's not just colorful imagery, by the way. It happened. In 1852, a London home literally exploded due to a buildup of methane from its basement cesspit. The walls cracked, flames burst from the ground floor fireplace. Luckily, no one was killed, but the incident terrified the neighborhood, and rightfully so. Methane was a serious issue. Waste, when trapped and left to ferment, releases flammable gases. With candles, gas lamps, and coal fires all around, this made privy maintenance a life-and-death situation. And yet, many people ignored it, out of necessity or exhaustion. Historians still debate how widespread these toilet-related explosions really were. Some argue they were rare and sensationalized. Others believe they were just underreported, because who wants to admit their house blew up due to bad plumbing? You pass another home. This one has a slightly newer structure attached to the side, a water closet. A true novelty in the 1850s. A small enclosed toilet room with an actual flushing mechanism. It's operated by a chain, and it empties into a rudimentary pipe system that allegedly carries the waste away. It's a dream. But it's also unpredictable. These early toilets were finicky. They leaked, they cracked, and most importantly, they required water, which, as you've seen, wasn't always available or clean. Many water closets had to be flushed manually, sometimes with buckets. Others relied on cisterns that only filled during certain hours. And when they didn't work, you were back to dumping the contents yourself. That's right. Even the future had a foot in the past. You step into a courtyard where a group of tenants are arguing over whose turn it is to clean the shared privy. A young boy kicks at the dirt. "Why can't we just have pipes like they do uptown?" he mutters. One of the adults sighs, "Because pipes cost money, and landlords don't live here." It's a sobering thought. The early plumbing revolution was a revolution for the wealthy. For everyone else, it was an expensive rumor. But change was coming. The 1850s and 60s saw the beginning of sewer systems in major cities. Engineers began to map underground networks, build pumping stations, and campaign for sanitation reform. Still, it would take years, decades even, before the average Victorian home could say goodbye to the privy for good. You glance up at a second-story window. A young woman is leaning out, holding her nose and scowling toward the backyard. Below her, someone's trying to pour quicklime into the pit to keep the stench down. It won't work. Not really, but it might make her feel like she's doing something. And you? You're learning fast. Victorian hygiene wasn't just about soap and water. It was about architecture, about access, about surviving a daily onslaught of inconvenience, risk, and unpleasant smells. And sometimes, it was about listening for that ominous gurgle under the floorboards and hoping to God it wasn't the start of another explosion. By now, you're no stranger to the grime. You've stepped through sloshing alleys, ducked flying chamber pots, and held your breath around cesspits. But tonight, your walk takes you somewhere quieter, more refined. The lamps burn a little brighter here, the buildings rise taller and straighter, and for just a moment, it smells like roses? No, not quite. It's perfume. Thick, powdery, cloying. And you're about to learn why. This is the domain of the Victorian lady, corseted and composed, elegant on the outside, and desperately trying not to smell like a public privy. You follow a group of women stepping out of a carriage, their gowns brushing the cobblestones. Their waists are cinched into impossible shapes, their gloves pristine. They glide, heads high, barely breathing, and not just because of social pressure. Quite literally, they can't. The corset won't allow it. Victorian corsets were no joke. Worn tightly beneath layers of clothing, they reshaped a woman's torso, forced her ribs inward, and compressed her lungs. Breathing was shallow, movement was stiff. And sweating? Oh, they absolutely did. But they didn't talk about it. Instead, women relied on layers, undergarments, petticoats, bodices, and chemises to soak up whatever their corseted bodies couldn't hide. Washing these items, as you've seen, was infrequent. So what did they do? They perfumed the problem. You enter a drawing room, invited in by the open window and the flickering light inside. There, you see a woman powdering her décolletage with a lavender-scented puff. Beside her is a small bottle labeled Eau de Cologne, another, Spirit of Violets, and another still, Hungarian water. Victorian women layered scent like armor. It wasn't about seduction, it was about defense. Defense against the reek of horse manure, coal dust, unwashed linen, and the not-so-gentle funk of 10-hour days in a whalebone cage. Historians still debate whether perfume truly covered the smell or just created a sort of scented fog that numbed the senses. But the intent was clear. If you couldn't scrub it away, you drowned it in florals. You lean closer to the vanity and notice something else. Tiny jars of creams and pastes. Deodorant as we know it didn't exist, but there were aromatic pastes for under the arms, made from wax, baking soda, and whatever herb happened to smell less like onions. And let's talk about the bathroom, or the lack of one. Ladies didn't visit the lavatory often. In public, it was nearly impossible. Public toilets for women barely existed. Modesty dictated that ladies should not admit to having bodily functions, so they waited and waited, or used special urinettes tucked beneath their skirts, often carried in carriages for emergencies. Yes, portable Victorian pee-cups. You pause in a hallway, hearing the rustle of skirts behind a closed door. A maid exits carrying a ceramic vessel and gives you a look that says, "Don't ask." But hygiene wasn't just a logistical challenge, it was a gendered burden. Women were expected to remain pure, both morally and physically. That meant white clothes, lace, powdered hands, and smelling like roses no matter what was rotting outside the window. You pass a millinery shop where bonnets are displayed like museum pieces. Hats weren't just fashion, they were odor shields. A carefully pinned hat could cover greasy roots, distract from a week of skipped hair washing, and anchor scented sachets tucked behind the ears. And then there were gloves. Always gloves. To protect the hands, yes, but also to hide dirt beneath the nails, to avoid skin-on-skin contact, to prevent the spread of whatever was crawling around the omnipresent door handles. You stop near a dress shop. In the window is a corset on display. It's dainty, pink, and terrifying. Tight lacing was a mark of femininity, but also a trap. Women couldn't bend, couldn't twist, and could barely eat. Meals were small, posture was upright, and the fainting couch was a real necessity. Why? Because breathing through a corset, in a room full of coal smoke and stale perfume, while balancing social grace and body heat, was exhausting. You watch two ladies fanning themselves with painted silk. One coughs softly, dabbing her lips with a lace handkerchief. She's pale, not the fashionable kind of pale, but the about-to-collapse kind. Still, she smiles, because decorum comes first. And what about menstruation? Ah, yes, another hidden corner of the Victorian hygiene closet. Sanitary products were primitive at best. Most women used folded cloth rags, washed and reused. There were no pads, no tampons, no meet-all. Just dark skirts, careful sitting, and a whole lot of discomfort. Some even wore sanitary aprons, rubber or oilcloth panels worn under dresses to catch leaks. Others simply didn't leave the house. Periods weren't discussed. They were endured. You duck out of the way as a carriage rolls past, splashing muddy water across the road. A woman shrieks, lifting her skirts. But beneath those skirts are layers. Not just petticoats, but combinations, bloomers, and more. If the mud doesn't soak all the way through, that's considered a win. And here's a strange fringe fact for you. Some believe that sweating, especially in the underarms, was unhealthy for women. It was thought to release vital energy, so some women applied lead-based powders to stop it, which, as you can guess, slowly poisoned them. Fashionable self-destruction, Victorian style. You make your way through the square now, where a small soiree is gathering. Music filters out from an open window. Inside, the ladies sip tea, smile politely, and adjust their gloves just so. You'd never know what they've been through to be there. The corsets, the perfumes, the heat, the aching feet from boots that weren't meant for walking, just for appearing. They look beautiful, immaculate. But under the powder and polish, their bodies are compressed, overheated, and, yes, just as sweaty as everyone else's. Because no amount of lace can stop a body from being a body. You turn one last time before heading down the lane, catching sight of a young woman removing her bonnet in front of a mirror. Her hair is matted with pomade. Her camise has sweat stains. Her feet are red from her boots. She sighs, just a little, and then starts brushing out her hair. 100 strokes, like clockwork. Because tomorrow, she'll do it all again. You leave behind the drawing rooms and lavender-scented parlor walls, stepping back into the night air thick with soot and wood smoke. A sharp breeze cuts through the alley as you find yourself crossing into the heart of the city again. But this time, your attention shifts, not to the women in their corsets or the maids pouring out chamber pots, but to the gentlemen. Men, after all, weren't immune to the great Victorian hygiene dance. And if you thought the ladies were struggling, you're about to discover that men had their own swamp of grooming quirks, equal parts style and stink. You pass a barber shop, its striped pole barely illuminated by a flickering gas lamp. Inside, a man leans back in a leather chair, a white cloth around his neck, a barber rubbing something thick and glossy into his mustache. That something? Pomade. A Victorian staple made from a charming blend of lard, tallow, beeswax, and essential oils, or, for those with fewer funds, whatever greasy substance was cheapest. Pomade was slathered into hair and beards to give that shiny, well-groomed appearance. Of course, it also attracted dust, insects, and once, according to rumor, a small bird. Historians still argue whether pomade was a sign of good taste or merely a necessary evil to keep wild Victorian hair in check. Either way, the end result was the same. A hairdo that looked polished but could double as flypaper. You watch the man tip the barber a coin before adjusting his cravat in the mirror. His collar is sharp, his coat freshly brushed, but you notice the slight glint of sweat beading under his powdered chin. He smells faintly of tobacco, bay rum, and something deeper, an undernote of you tried your best. Male hygiene in the Victorian era was deeply tied to social rank. A man of means might have a shaving set, a comb, perhaps even cologne. But shaving was tricky. Razors were straight blades, often dulled by frequent use, and shaving soap had to be whipped into a froth by hand. One nick, and without antibiotics, you might be battling a nasty infection for days. And for those who couldn't afford a barber, they shaved by candlelight with water that may or may not be warm and razors that may or may not be clean. Many simply gave up and let their beards grow wild, earning themselves the nickname Whiskered Victorians. You pause beside a newsboy, maybe 10 years old, with grime on his cheeks and a mop of hair slicked back with something suspiciously shiny. Even the children copied the grooming habits of older men, if only to appear employable. Employers, after all, expected cleanliness, even if they didn't provide the means to achieve it. A man passes you wearing a waistcoat and a top hat. His boots are polished, but his breath, like a corpse that's just finished smoking a cigar. Dental care for men, as you've seen, was equally appalling. But here's a fresh tidbit. Many men believed that chewing tobacco helped clean the teeth, so they'd chew, spit, and call it a hygiene ritual. The side effect? Stained teeth, rotting gums, and the lovely brown spittle that decorated many a Victorian doorstep. You step into a pub for a moment, more out of curiosity than thirst. Inside, the air is thick with pipe smoke and damp wool. Men crowd around tables, laughing, drinking, arguing about politics. One removes his coat, revealing a shirt stained at the armpits and a crumpled linen collar yellowed from days, possibly weeks of wear. Victorian men rarely changed shirts daily, maybe every few days if they were lucky. Collars were detachable and washable, but the rest? Well, it just had to hang in there. Literally. And then there were fleas. Yes, fleas. And lice, and bedbugs. Most men shared beds, at home, in boarding houses, or even in pubs that offered rooms for the night. Clean sheets were aspirational. Infested sheets were common, and men's clothes, frequently reworn and rarely washed, made the perfect habitat. You recall an account from the time, a traveling salesman who shook out his coat each night before sleep, not to straighten it, but to get the fleas out. 3 good shakes, he claimed, and they'd fall like black confetti. But even with all this, appearance mattered. You stopped by a shoeshine boy kneeling beside a stoop, working furiously on a gentleman's boots. Shoes had to shine. Hats had to sit just right. Beards had to be tamed, even if your underarms could peel paint. And yes, let's talk about those underarms. Deodorant, as we know it, didn't exist. Men relied on talcum powder, cologne, or simply accepted that they smelled like coal, sweat, and beef pee. The belief was that a masculine odor was normal, even desirable. Men were expected to be a little pungent, as long as they didn't cross over into feral. You pass a chemist's window displaying a bottle labeled Dr. Fudge's Tonic for Manly Vigor. Probably a mix of alcohol, opium, and some unfortunate root. Many such tonics promised not only to restore health, but to refresh the body. A few drops behind the ears, and you too could pretend you hadn't worn the same socks all week. Men with money had more options. A valet might prepare a hot bath, shave your stubble, polish your boots. But for the common man, hygiene was often squeezed in between shifts, using a basin and a damp cloth, preferably before anyone noticed. And yet, these men walked tall. They strutted down the streets of London or Manchester, hats tipped, boots clacking, cologne wafting bravely above the stench of 1,000 chamber pots. You watch as a young clerk steps into the street from an office building. His shirt is too tight at the neck, his collar digs into his skin, but he adjusts it with care, lifts his chin, and keeps walking. Because looking clean, no matter how you smelled, meant respect. And in a world that ran on class, reputation, and visual cues, that counted for everything. You turn the corner now, passing a small hat shop where a man and his son are carefully brushing dust off a bowler. Behind them, shelves are stacked with gloves, cravats, and boot polish. These were the tools of the well-dressed man, Not soap, not a shower, but polish and starch and scent. Because in the Victorian world, hygiene wasn't about being clean. It was about being presentable. A performance, one pomade-coated strand at a time. The city quiets slightly as you step away from the pubs and barbershops and into a residential street. A quieter row of soot-streaked houses with crooked chimneys and faint candlelight flickering behind curtains. It feels peaceful, almost gentle, until you realize something smells distinctly sour. You glance around and spot the likely culprits. Two small children squat in the dirt yard, barefoot and sticky, poking at something with a stick. Their cheeks are smudged, their noses running, their hair wild and knotted. You blink and for a moment it hits you. Victorian children were not okay. And not just in the poetic childhood lost to industry sense. We're talking literal filth. Hygiene-wise, children in this era were miniature disaster zones. Filthy, itchy, sneezy little bundles of exposure. You approach a tenement yard where a group of children gather around a laundry line. One is eating something unidentifiable with their hands. Another is scratching their head so vigorously you feel the urge to itch in sympathy. A third is crying softly while a sister dabs at his scraped knee with a rag that probably isn't sterile or clean or remotely effective. Let's start with the basics. Bathing, rare. The same weekly or monthly bathing schedule that applied to adults extended to children with even less consistency. Soap was harsh, water was cold, and kids squirmed. So most parents avoided the drama unless the child was visibly crusted in something concerning. Historians still argue whether this hands-off approach stemmed from cultural beliefs. Some thought frequent bathing weakened children's immune systems, or plain practicality. Likely both. Bathing a child meant heating water, catching them, undressing them, and keeping them still. All in a room with no heating, no plumbing, and about 4 other people also trying to sleep. So most days, a quick face wipe, maybe hands if you were lucky. The rest, well, they'd air out. You pass a mother hauling a child toward a bucket. The kid wails. She mutters something about worms. And that brings us to another charming reality: parasites. Poor hygiene, poor nutrition, and dirty water meant children were riddled with intestinal worms. It was so common that many families simply accepted the presence of parasites as a normal phase of growing up. Deworming tonics were sold at apothecaries, but they were foul-tasting and often filled with questionable ingredients, including mercury, turpentine, or crushed metal filings. Meanwhile, external parasites thrived too. Fleas and lice weren't occasional nuisances, they were permanent roommates. Children shared beds, combs, bonnets, and clothing. They were rarely treated. Just combed, occasionally shaved, and slathered in something pungent like kerosene or vinegar. You spot a girl trying to braid her sister's hair. It's matted and speckled with something moving. The girl gives up and tucks it under a cap. And clothing? Oh dear. Most children had maybe 2 outfits total, if that. A Sunday best and a daily uniform that was often handed down through several siblings, patched repeatedly and almost never properly washed. Petticoats were optional. Underwear, in some cases, non-existent. One quirky solution: skeletal clothing. These were gowns or tunics with open sides or backs, designed to minimize laundry. Children could go to the privy or just crouch wherever they happened to be without undressing. Efficient? Yes. Hygienic? Questionable at best. You see a group of boys playing near a water pump. One slips, falls face first into the mud, and pops back up grinning, eyes bright, face streaked, not a care in the world. There's something beautiful about it, in a gritty, deeply contagious kind of way. And then there's schooling. Victorian children, especially the working class, often attended charity schools or Sunday schools. There, dozens of them were packed into rooms with poor ventilation, few resources, and even fewer clean surfaces. Colds spread like wildfire. Lice, ubiquitous. Teachers were strict, soap was rare, and ink-stained fingers doubled as napkins. Many children also worked. Chimney sweeps, factory hands, errand boys. These jobs were filthy, dangerous, and exposed children to even more grime. Chimney sweeps in particular crawled through soot-choked flues, inhaling ash and carcinogens before they even lost their baby teeth. You walk past a little boy with blackened palms. He's crouched beside a coal bin, watching a beetle climb his boot. You'd guess his age at 6 or 7. His expression is calm. He doesn't flinch when an older boy throws a clod of dirt at him. He just ducks and keeps watching the beetle. Children developed grit, figuratively and literally. And yet there was care. Mothers and fathers, when they were around, did what they could. You see a woman wiping her son's face with her apron. Another blows on a spoonful of porridge. One braids her daughter's hair into loops and tucks a ribbon into the back, even if the ribbon is torn. They used what they had: rag dolls, tin cups, borrowed soap. And they tried to preserve some softness amid the mud and coughing and lice. Some more affluent families fared better, of course. Upper-class children had nannies, nurses, and access to bathtubs. They were powdered, dressed in white, and photographed beside rose bushes. But even they were not immune. Lice didn't care about lace, and sickness moved quickly through nurseries, regardless of square footage. There's one fringe belief you'll find fascinating. Some parents swore by sunlight baths, letting children sit naked or semi-clothed in the sun, hoping it would cleanse them. Others advocated cold water dunkings to toughen them up. Either way, it was a kind of hygiene by nature. Let the elements do what soap could not. You hear a giggle and turn. A toddler is toddling toward you, arms outstretched. He trips, face plants in the dirt, and sits up giggling again. His hands go straight to his mouth, smeared in who knows what. You flinch. His mother does not. She just picks him up, brushes him off, and hands him a crust of bread. Victorian childhood was not a soft experience. It was muddy, itchy, and often sickly. But it was also resilient. And as you walk away, the child watches you go, mouth full of dirt and bread, waving as if to say, "We may be filthy, but we're still here." Your feet are aching now, though not nearly as badly as if you were wearing the stiff leather boots of a Victorian laborer. You turn toward the edge of the city center, where the shadows of towering buildings give way to something colder, sterner, more clinical. Ahead of you, a large stone structure with narrow windows and thick whitewashed walls. It's a hospital, or rather, what passes for one in the mid-1800s. You hesitate at the entrance. After everything you've seen, privies, chamber pots, slums, lice, you'd think a hospital would offer some reprieve, a refuge of cleanliness. But you'd be wrong, because Victorian medicine was still in its filthy infancy, and hospitals were often more dangerous than the diseases they treated. You step through the heavy doors and into a hallway that smells of carbolic acid, sweat, and blood. The floorboards creak under your shoes, gas lamps sputter along the corridor. There's a strange hush to the place, punctuated only by the occasional moan, the squeal of a metal cart, or a nurse's sharp whisper. You peek into a ward. Row after row of narrow iron beds, each filled with someone who looks somewhere between unwell and barely alive. No curtains for privacy, no gloves on the staff, and, shockingly, no regular hand-washing. That's right. Hand-washing was not standard practice. In fact, many doctors went from surgery to patient rounds without so much as wiping their hands on their coats, which were themselves stiff with dried bodily fluids from dozens of past operations. You watch as a surgeon finishes sewing up a leg wound. His apron is soaked. He sets down his instruments, none of which have been cleaned since yesterday, and walks directly over to examine another patient, reaching into her mouth to check a tooth abscess. Historians still argue how long it took for the medical community to accept basic hygiene practices. While physicians like Ignaz Semmelweis and Joseph Lister championed hand-washing and antiseptics in the mid-1800s, many colleagues dismissed them. Germs, they claimed, were nonsense. Dirt under the fingernails was simply a badge of hard work. And so, hospital wards were filled not only with the sick, but with the soon-to-be sicker. Infections spread like wildfire. Puerperal fever, what we'd now call sepsis, killed thousands of women after childbirth. Amputations led to gangrene. Open wounds festered. You pass a surgical theater and pause. A man lies on a wooden table, surrounded by onlookers, students and spectators alike. There's no anesthesia, just a bottle of whiskey and a leather strap for biting. The surgeon begins his work, sawing through flesh with astonishing speed. The crowd murmurs. A student faints. Victorians called it heroic surgery. We'd call it a horror show. One quirky tradition? Surgeons wore the same coat over and over again. The dirtier the better. It showed experience. A coat stiff with blood was considered a badge of honor. White coats, like we see today, didn't become popular until later. Back then, medical professionals looked more like butchers than healers. You find your way to the children's ward. It's quieter. A nurse dabs a cloth across a child's forehead, her hands unwashed from the last patient. There's no running water in the ward, just basins of cold water hauled in by assistants and rarely changed. One child coughs. Another stares at the ceiling. Both are pale, thin, and wrapped in soiled blankets. The nurse gives you a tired look. "We do what we can," she says, and truly some did. Many nurses and orderlies tried to keep things clean, despite the lack of tools, training, and respect. Florence Nightingale, after all, was just beginning her revolution in hospital sanitation. Her belief, clean sheets, fresh air, and hand-washing could save lives. And she was right, but her influence was still spreading. In many places, hospitals remained breeding grounds for disease. You pass a hallway where linens are being aired out, not washed, aired out, hung over banisters or placed near windows to freshen before being reused. There's no bleach, no disinfectant, just sunshine, prayer, and a quick shake. And surgical tools? Laid out on trays, wiped occasionally with alcohol if available, or a bit of carbolic spray. Between patients, instruments were often used without proper sterilization. Forceps, saws, needles, all passed from one person to another, carrying who knows what in their grooves. You find yourself at the dispensary, where rows of glass bottles sit on high wooden shelves. Laudanum, mercury salts, arsenic tonics. Many of the treatments were as dangerous as the diseases. Opium was prescribed for everything from toothaches to depression. Mercury was used for skin infections. Bloodletting still made appearances, though it was falling out of favor. You hear a groan from a nearby cot. A man clutches his stomach, a grayish sweat on his brow. The nurse administers a spoonful of dark liquid, then wipes his face with a cloth that's already been used on 2 other patients. Even the act of comfort could kill. Still, people came to hospitals, because the alternative, no care at all, was worse. In some cases, these institutions saved lives, and as public health reform gained traction, conditions did begin to improve. Some fringe hospitals experimented with sunlight therapy. Others tried open-air pavilions for tuberculosis patients. There were sanitation pioneers and brave reformers fighting against the tide of filth. But in most wards, change came slowly, if at all. You step back out into the night air, feeling like you've just escaped something. The hospital looms behind you, quiet, dignified, and full of unintentional harm. The irony of the Victorian hospital? It tried to heal with dirty hands. It sought to soothe with festering sheets. And somehow in all of that, it laid the groundwork for the medical miracles we enjoy today. But for the average patient back then, it was a gamble. Would you leave cured, or would you never leave at all? You take one last look at the building's stone facade. In the silence of the street, a bell tolls. You're not sure whether it's for dinner or for someone's final breath. You're back on the streets now, the hospital's sour scent still clinging faintly to your coat, the memory of stiff aprons and unwashed hands still lingering in your mind. But just as you're wondering how an entire society tolerated such filth, a shift begins to ripple through the scene around you. Subtle at first, then undeniable. A newspaper boy shouts headlines on a corner. The words catch your attention. Invisible killers in the water. And doctors clash over germ theory. And just like that, you've stumbled into one of the most profound turning points in Victorian hygiene, the rise of germ theory. Before this, people explained disease in terms of miasma, a noxious, foul-smelling air that was believed to cause illness. If something stank, they assumed it was dangerous. Not entirely wrong, but not quite right either. You wander past a crowd gathered around a street preacher who's shouting about sin and sickness being one and the same. It is moral decay that invites physical decay, he cries, holding up a grimy handkerchief like proof. But a few blocks away, something very different is happening. A man in a long coat is carefully collecting water samples from a public pump. He's calm, methodical, scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal. You've just spotted Dr. John Snow. Yes, not the fictional brooding kind, but the real one. Snow, in the 1850s, made a shocking claim. Cholera didn't come from smelly air. It came from contaminated water. He traced a cholera outbreak in Soho to a single water pump on Broad Street. When authorities removed the pump handle, the outbreak subsided. It was a turning point, but not everyone believed him. Historians still argue about how quickly, or reluctantly, the medical world accepted germ theory. Some doctors, like Snow and later Joseph Lister, embraced the invisible microbe explanation. Lister began sterilizing surgical instruments and using carbolic acid in operating rooms. Death rates dropped. A miracle? No. Just cleanliness. You pass a pharmacy window now where bottles of antiseptic are prominently displayed. Kills invisible germs, the label boasts. Inside, a clerk wipes the counter with a damp rag. It smells vaguely medicinal. You notice, with a strange kind of awe, that he's actually washing his hands. This is new, and it's spreading. You continue on, through a cleaner part of the city than the one you first entered. Streets are less crowded. Gutters are less chunky. A sanitation crew carts away trash instead of letting it rot in piles. You even spot a fresh layer of gravel on a once muddy lane. But not everyone's on board. As you near a public square, you overhear an elderly gentleman scoffing at a younger man's talk of germs. Nonsense, he says, sniffing dismissively. I've breathed in coal smoke for 40 years and I'm still alive. You don't have the heart to point out his hacking cough. Resistance to germ theory wasn't just stubbornness, it was fear. If tiny invisible things could kill you, what wasn't dangerous? The idea that disease wasn't caused by something you could smell or see or touch, but by things you couldn't even perceive? Terrifying. Still, slowly, change crept in. Doctors began boiling their tools. Nurses started washing sheets more often. Hospitals installed basins with running water. And most miraculously of all, midwives began washing their hands between patients, cutting maternal death rates drastically. You pause at a schoolhouse where children are lining up to enter. A sign posted on the wall reads, "Wash your hands before lunch." The ink is smudged, the teacher looks harried, but the sign is there. Of course, not everything was solved. The public still faced dubious advice, like swallowing sulfur tablets to purify the blood, or rubbing quinine on the gums. Germ theory sparked reform, but also sparked an explosion of pseudoscience and miracle cures. You step inside a general store and browse the shelf labeled Health and Hygiene. Among the more credible items, soap, disinfectant, bandages, you find germicidal hair tonic, antiseptic beard elixir, and a jar of internal cleanser, which is just turpentine and sassafras root. It's progress, just with a few splinters. You pass a public bathhouse next, and this one looks different from the steamy, soot-caked building you saw earlier. There's a printed timetable outside. Gentlemen's hour, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Women's hour, 10 a.m. 12 p.m. Inside, it smells cleaner, sharper, almost modern. Soap production had become more affordable thanks to industrial advances and tax reform. Once taxed heavily and considered a luxury, soap by the 1860s was increasingly within reach. And with it came the idea that being clean wasn't just moral, it was healthy, even desirable. You smile to yourself. If the Victorians had Instagram, you suspect hack germ-free might have started trending. And yet, even as these changes unfold, they're uneven. Many working-class neighborhoods still lack sewer access. Water is still fetched from outdoor pumps. Outhouses still dot the backyards. Old beliefs still linger like the scent of unwashed linen. Change, after all, doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in. One washed hand, one sterilized scalpel. One nurse who insists on fresh sheets, even if the doctor rolls his eyes. You round a corner and see a boy washing his face at a pump. He scrubs with care, splashing cold water onto his cheeks, even using a scrap of soap. His clothes are ragged, but his grin is clean. You nod. That's the future right there. In a city that once exploded with waste, where hospitals healed and harmed in the same breath, where perfume stood in for showers and chamber pots lived under every bed, something has shifted. People are beginning to understand. Clean isn't just polite, it's powerful. And though the road ahead is long and still muddy in places, you feel it in the air tonight. A new scent, faint but unmistakable. Hope. The sun rises sluggishly over the rooftops, casting a coppery glow across the chimneys, spires, and soot-streaked stone. You've wandered these streets long enough now to sense something deeper than just grime and reform. You felt it in the gutters and gas lamps, heard it in the whispers of shopkeepers and surgeons alike. The constant Victorian tug-of-war between progress and quackery. And nowhere is that tension more obvious than in the world of cleanliness myths and pseudoscience. A truly bizarre terrain where hygiene, health, and hope all mixed with, well, total nonsense. You step into a small herbalist shop tucked behind a fishmonger's. Inside, the air smells of camphor and damp wool. The shelves are lined with brown bottles, curious powders, and glass jars containing pickled things that seem to move ever so slightly. The shopkeeper, a spectacled man with a twitchy smile, beckons you in. Looking for a remedy? He asks. I've got tar soap, vinegar foot powder, and mercury toothpaste. Works wonders. You blink. Yes, mercury toothpaste. Because what's better than brushing away plaque, than also eroding your nerves while you're at it? Victorian self-care was a minefield. Hygiene was suddenly important, but science hadn't quite caught up to the enthusiasm. And in the vacuum left behind, quackery thrived. You spot a flyer tacked to the door. Dr. Bleacher's patented blood purifier. Cleanse the soul through the pores. It promises whiter skin, longer life, and removal of evil vapors through regular application of a mysterious ointment that smells vaguely like lamp oil. Many Victorians believed disease left visible signs: dirty skin, spots, discoloration. So people turned to coal tar soap, arsenic wafers, and complexion tonics that contained strychnine or carbolic acid. Anything that burned was thought to be working. You duck outside again, where a man is hawking breath-purifying pebbles from a cart. They're just sugar-coated charcoal lumps, but he swears they eradicate sewer gas from the throat. His breath still smells like wet dogs and pipe tobacco. Not all hygiene myths were dangerous, some were just absurd. Take vinegar foot baths, for instance. Popular among women trying to cool their blood and tighten the nerves. Or brushing your teeth with soot and crushed eggshells to strengthen enamel. Which, ironically, did the opposite. You wander into a ladies' salon next, where rows of glass perfume vials shimmer under the morning light. One reads, "Eau Mystique," for removing negative energies from the hair. You're told it contains myrrh, lavender oil, and blessed spring water gathered at moonrise. Guaranteed to make your hair not only cleaner, but more spiritually aligned. Historians still debate how sincerely people believed these products worked, or whether they simply had no better alternatives. Likely a bit of both. In a world where doctors disagreed about hand washing and sewer gas was blamed for everything from gout to melancholy, people filled the gaps with whatever sounded plausible. You pass a laundress who swears by bluing, a method of adding a blue tint to white clothes to make them appear cleaner. It didn't remove stains, of course, just masked the yellowing. But it worked. Optically, at least. And then there were the more mystical practices. Salt scrubs to expel demons. Sulfur steam to cleanse impure thoughts. One ad even suggested whistling during a bath to activate positive cleansing vibrations. You chuckle and then remember modern detox juice cleanses and realize maybe we haven't changed that much after all. You're drawn next to a window where a mother dabs her daughter's cheeks with rose water. She sprinkles a white powder, possibly starch, possibly chalk, into the girl's bonnet. "To keep the lice away," she mutters. It probably won't work, but it's what she has. And that, you begin to realize, is the soul of the era. They tried. You spot another curious sight, a man sitting in a box that looks like a coffin with a head hole. A sign above reads, "Portable Vapor Cabinet. Cleanse from the inside out." Steam pours out. His expression is somewhere between peaceful and regretting every life decision that led him here. These portable saunas promise to rid the body of disease by sweating out the toxins. In truth, they mostly just made people extremely dehydrated and dizzy. But they felt modern, scientific, hopeful. You pause by a newspaper stand. One headline reads, "Lister's Antiseptics Gaining Favor, but is carbolic spray safe?" Next to it, an ad for a home enema kit boasting colon clarity through ancient wisdom. The juxtaposition is wild. Real medical progress side by side with snake oil. You duck into a chemist's shop, where shelves of legitimate antiseptic soaps share space with mummy powder. Yes, actual ground mummy remains, sold as a cure for all manner of ailments, including bad skin. Egyptomania had created a black market for ancient remains, which were powdered and sold for profit. It's the kind of hygiene lore that leaves you queasy. Back on the street, you overhear a woman arguing with her neighbor. "Cold water's the devil's bath," she says. "Opens your pores to spirits, best to scrub with gin." Her neighbor scoffs, "I use rum, better scent." You nod to yourself. There's a strange brilliance to it all. Improvised cleanliness, misguided rituals. The determined creativity of people trying to control their world with whatever knowledge or nonsense they had. And it wasn't all foolishness. Many of these practices were rooted in real observation. Soap made people smell better. Clean sheets helped you sleep. Brushing your hair made you look more human. It's just that in the absence of solid science, people filled the cracks with imagination. As you wander on, the wind carries a dozen competing scents. Lemon oil, burning lye, lavender, rotting vegetables, and maybe a bit of eau de mummy. You're no longer surprised. This is a city on the cusp of understanding. A place where cleanliness means more than washing. It means hope, ritual, and belief in something better. Even if that belief comes bottled with mercury. It's late afternoon now. The shadows stretch long across the cobbled roads, and the sky glows with the golden tones of a city that somehow still manages to look romantic, even as it smells faintly of horses and old cabbage. You've wandered back toward the wealthier districts, where the streets are lined with polished brass doorknobs. Gas lamps are trimmed, and top hats nod politely from beneath ornate awnings. But don't let the elegance fool you, because even among silk gloves and carriages, the illusion of refinement often masks the same old grime. Welcome to the hidden contradictions of high society hygiene, where everyone looked immaculate but smelled complicated. A liveried butler opens the door to a townhouse as you pass. Inside, a lady descends a staircase in a shimmering gown, her hair sculpted with pins and pomade, her posture flawless. Her heels tap against the parquet floor like she was born on a stage. But that faint perfume trailing behind her? It's not just Chanel No. 5, it's a defense mechanism. Because upper-class Victorians had money, yes, but cleanliness was still more performance than practice. You enter a grand salon where several women sip tea beneath a chandelier. A breeze stirs the heavy velvet curtains, which haven't been washed in, well, probably not this year. They hang thick with dust and coal soot, absorbing the perfume and powder in the air. You catch the scent of rose oil, musk, and the unmistakable sharpness of mold lurking beneath the floral notes. The women are graceful, composed, and powdered to perfection. But even here, in one of the cleanest homes in the city, bathing is rare. Weekly if lucky, monthly if modest. And hair? Often untouched by water for weeks. You pass a dressing room where a maid helps her mistress adjust her corset. The lady lifts her arms and the maid recoils half a centimeter. Nothing overt, but enough to know, under all that lace, it's not all roses. Upper-class hygiene came with its own strange set of rules. Baths were often seen as unladylike or weakening. A woman might take to water only under medical advice. And even then, it was likely a sponge bath, a perfumed cloth dabbed along the collarbones, wrists, and décolletage. That was enough. The rest of the body was expected to remain unseen and unsmelled. You glance around and spot a faint white smear across the neckline of one woman's gown. Powder, applied to lighten the skin, hide blemishes, and soak up sweat. Beneath the powder, possibly eczema, rashes, or discoloration from heavy lead-based makeup. But she smiles, daintily, because appearance in this world is everything. Historians still argue whether the upper class truly believed they were cleaner than the poor, or simply invested so heavily in the appearance of cleanliness that they ignored everything else. Either way, the divide was clear. Wealth gave you distance from dirt, even if not protection. You pause at the powder room, where a mirror reflects a woman dabbing perfume behind her ears with a silk-tipped glass wand. She douses herself in millefleurs, a fragrance of over 20 oils. Not because she enjoys the scent, but because she's headed to the opera, and the man beside her hasn't bathed since last Tuesday. And that man likely has a valet who brushes his clothes, oils his mustache, and dusts him with starch. But you can bet your last farthing he's not changing his shirt every day. You follow a footman into the dining room, where the table is set with silver cutlery, linen napkins, and enough candelabras to stage a small musical. But glance under the table and you'll spot something curious. Spittoons. Because despite all this elegance, upper-class men still chewed tobacco. Still hacked up phlegm into decorative little pots at their feet. The table may gleam, but the habits? Not always genteel. And then there's the matter of the wigs. Powdered wigs weren't as fashionable in the later Victorian years as they were in earlier times, but many older men still wore them. And even when wigs fell out of favor, hairpieces and false buns persisted. For both sexes. Often made of human hair, sometimes yours, sometimes someone else's. Wigs and hairpieces weren't cleaned often. They were brushed, perfumed, and restyled. But washed? Rarely. Why? Because wet wigs got heavy, musty, and hard to dry. Better to sprinkle them with starch or lavender dust and pretend. You step into a drawing room and notice an upholstered chair with a lace cloth draped over the back. The anti-macassar, designed to protect furniture from the oils and pomades slathered into men's hair. A brilliant little invention, born from the realization that no amount of elegance could stop a greasy head from leaving its mark. You pass through a gallery of portraits, ladies with soft ringlets, men with polished shoes and stiff collars. They look pristine. But you now know the truth. Beneath the crinolines and bow ties, they were every bit as sweaty, itchy, and gas-bladdered as the fishwives and coal haulers outside. Only difference? They could pay someone to wipe it away. Or at least to make it look like they had. You step back outside and into the garden, where a small party is gathering under a gazebo. A man lights a cigar with shaking fingers. A woman pats her neck with a lace kerchief. A maid discreetly sniffs her own sleeve before serving drinks. Cleanliness here is theater, a finely tuned illusion. And yet, not without effort. Because these people tried. They believed in refinement. They powdered. They perfumed. They bought soap from Paris and cologne from Florence. They laid lavender in their linens, rose petals in their drawers, and baking soda in their boots. But until germ theory took root, until sewage systems were complete and water flowed freely through pipes into their porcelain tubs, no amount of silk could stop the stink. You take one last look at the gathering. Their teeth gleam thanks to soot and chalk. Their cheeks glow thanks to lead and vinegar. And under all of it, their bodies ache from corsets, sweat beneath petticoats, and crave the kind of bath they rarely took. Because here, at the peak of society, the rules were clear. Look clean, smell expensive, but don't for heaven's sake actually sweat. Evening begins to stretch across the city, settling softly on roof tiles and church steeples, cooling the heat that's been building all day. The gas lamps flicker to life again, their glow catching on windows as families return home, shops shutter, and the city exhales, though with a distinct whiff of coal and cabbage. You've seen the worst and weirdest of Victorian hygiene by now. The grime, the perfumes, the mystery cures. But tonight, your boots take you toward something brighter. A neighborhood under construction, new pipes being laid, men in suspenders hauling bricks beside fresh stacks of soap. Because at last, you're entering the era of plumbing, paste, and progress. You stop beside a trench dug across the road. Inside it, gleaming pipes snake through the earth. Real, functioning sewer lines. Not cesspits, not gutters, not trenches filled with yesterday's bathwater and horse waste. But modern drainage, laid by crews trained under the vision of reformers like Joseph Bazalgette. Bazalgette, the man behind London's sewer overhaul, didn't just dream of clean streets. He built them. Miles of brick-lined tunnels, carefully sloped and engineered, redirecting the city's waste away from its drinking water for the first time in history. A feat of civil engineering and of public health. Historians agree, this was the turning point. When the connection between filth and disease stopped being speculation and started being concrete policy. You pass a water pump being dismantled. In its place, a pipe now runs directly into a tenement house. A tap, cold water on demand. You watch as a girl turns the spout, filling a tin basin and grinning as she splashes her hands. She's clean. Not scrubbed raw, not doused in vinegar. Just clean. This, right here, is revolutionary. You follow the street to a row of newer homes, modest but proud. Many now include small water closets built into side extensions or converted pantry spaces. No more privies out back. No more chamber pots under the bed, at least not for everyone. Progress came slowly, unevenly. But it came. You peer into a shop window where bars of soap are stacked like treasure. Pear's transparent soap. Once a luxury, now advertised for the working class. Ads everywhere proclaim, cleanliness is next to godliness and every child deserves soap. Soap had finally become mass-produced and affordable, thanks to chemical innovations and lower taxes. And with it came a cultural shift. Being clean wasn't just a class marker anymore. It was a moral imperative. You step into a small general store where shelves are lined with exciting novelties. Toothpaste in jars. Hair tonic with labels that boast germ-killing action. Shoe polish. Sanitary pads. Toothbrushes with bristles that weren't plucked from a pig that morning. Even a boxed set, the modern gentleman's grooming kit. And yes, the packaging says it includes instructions. You grin. Finally. Even personal routines changed. People began brushing their teeth daily. Not perfectly, not universally, but consistently. Tooth powders gave way to pastes. Some households boiled their toothbrushes to sanitize them. Others shared, but at least now it was a discussion. Baths also changed. With plumbing came the chance to bathe at home, in private and more often. Weekly baths turned into bi-weekly ones. And eventually, even daily for the bold and fortunate. Water heaters made it possible, and cast-iron bathtubs became a dream item for every aspiring homeowner. You pass a public bathhouse with a banner that reads, "Clean water for a healthy nation." Inside, the tiled walls gleam. The air smells of eucalyptus and warm steam. Mothers bathe children in separate stalls. Men read newspapers between showers. There are soap dispensers, towels, and a schedule. It's not perfect, but it's light years ahead of the murky shared tubs and sponge baths of just decades prior. You see children walking home from school, uniforms dusty but neat, hands washed, hair combed. They've had hygiene lessons. Teachers now talk about germs, about hand washing before meals, about brushing teeth and changing socks. It's no longer a fringe idea. It's the curriculum. Even factories are being inspected. The public health acts have teeth now. Inspectors enforce sanitation codes, water quality, waste disposal, living conditions. Tenants demand better, and landlords, some of them, actually listen. You stroll past an ad for a new municipal waste removal service, weekly pickups, affordable rates, a cart with a covered barrel, no more open heaps of garbage attracting rats. You sigh with relief, remembering the teetering piles of refuse from your first night in the slums. And what about those old chamber pots? Well, they're being replaced. Not overnight. But you'll see them now repurposed as flower pots, ash bins, or retired to dusty attics with an air of embarrassed nostalgia. And the night soil men? Mostly out of work, though some became sewer workers, pipe fitters, or public health employees. They too were absorbed into the modern age. You pause to watch a nurse leaving a new brick hospital, white apron crisp, hands freshly scrubbed. The building is lit, ventilated, and quiet, not the chaos of old. There's a smell of carbolic soap, of antiseptic, of survival. Inside, patients lie in clean beds, doctors wear white coats, instruments glint on sterilized trays. The walls are pale and the windows wide, a far cry from blood-crusted aprons and open pus in the hallway. It took decades, protests, deaths, revolutions of thought. But by the late 19th century, hygiene had become science, not suggestion. And what's perhaps most beautiful, it became normal. You watch as a young couple enters their modest home. He removes his boots by the door. She lights a lamp and fills a pitcher with clean water. She offers him the towel. They wash their hands together. No ceremony, just habit. And habit, you realize, is what hygiene needed all along. Night has wrapped itself around the city like a worn shawl, threadbare in places, a little frayed at the edges, but still warm with the breath of life that refuses to stop pulsing beneath the cobblestones. The air has shifted. It no longer bites with the acrid sting of open cesspits or the raw slap of rotting waste. No, it carries something gentler now, a hint of soap, a whiff of ironed linen, the faint comfort of boiling water behind thin curtains. You walk these final streets slowly now, not because you're tired, though you are, but because something in you wants to linger, to absorb the small, almost invisible miracles around you. A tap drips rhythmically against stone in the yard of a newly built home. Its song is simple, steady, a reminder that water no longer has to be hauled, begged, or bartered. It simply arrives. It's a quiet revolution, one that children born this year may never question. Just across the way, a boy, freckled, grinning, hair still damp from an evening rinse, sits cross-legged on the stoop, brushing his boots with careful focus. He pauses, sniffs the air, and smiles. Someone nearby has used real peppermint soap. Not floral, not powdery, clean. And that smell? It doesn't mean shame or desperation or the illusion of refinement. It just means someone cared enough to scrub, rinse, and pat dry. You turn onto a quieter street and pass what was once a cramped tenement yard. The ground is level now. The old privy door replaced with a rose trellis. Where the cesspit once bubbled in summer, someone has planted a patch of marigolds. Their scent is faintly bitter, but alive. There's still soil beneath your feet, but now it's just dirt. Nothing more, nothing less. The buildings here are still simple, brick, shuttered, roofs pitched steep to handle the rain. But the windows are cleaner than they used to be, and a few even glint with the reflection of gaslight bouncing off newly glazed tiles inside. You can picture the rooms behind those panes, basins emptied, feet washed, collars laid out crisp for the morning. And it's not just the homes. You pass a public fountain where once you might have hesitated to drink. Now a copper plaque reads, "Tested water supply 1893." The pipework is sealed. The bowl is dry, because the water flows elsewhere now, indoors, into spigots, copper taps, and iron kettles bubbling gently over evening fires. There's something sacred in that. And yet, some things haven't changed. You hear it in the scratch of a brush against cloth as a woman beats out the day's coal dust from her apron. You smell it in the boiled potatoes drifting from a window 3 floors up, and you see it in the habits that linger. Bonnets set to air out, boots turned upside down on racks, hands still wiped unconsciously on skirts. Because real change, it comes slowly. It creeps into life, one cautious step at a time. Not with thunder, but with towels hung up to dry. You pass a schoolhouse where chalky letters still cling to the blackboard inside. Wash hands before lunch, it says. It's not elegant, not poetic, but it's powerful. Generations of children will grow up thinking it's just what you do. The filth, the infections, the fevers, they'll become stories, faint memories in their grandmother's voice. The way she'll describe boiling water and scrubbing knuckles raw as if it were war. And maybe it was. You pause beneath a laundry line where sheets sway like soft sails in the dark. They are white, not bone white from lye and burning, but soft white, cotton warmed in the breeze, cleaned not just by soap, but by effort and time, and a society learning to treat hygiene not as punishment, but care. From a nearby window, you hear the quiet splash of water into a basin. Someone is washing their face before bed. The rhythm is slow, reassuring. You can imagine the cloth, warm and worn from hundreds of evenings just like this. A woman sings softly to herself in the next room. You can't make out the words, only the lilt. She sounds at peace. You think of all the people you've seen on this strange winding journey, the chimney-sweeping children with lice in their curls, the laundresses with bleeding hands and vinegar burns, the ladies wrapped in perfume and corsets, whose breath came in short, controlled sips, the barbers with their stiff brushes, the surgeons with their filthy coats, the mothers, endlessly wiping mouths and scrubbing knees, fighting to keep some shred of dignity amid a sea of soot and sickness. You think of the night soil men, of the midwives, of the soap sellers, of the engineers who laid the first pipes beneath streets that didn't yet believe in germs. And you wonder, did they ever stop to notice what they were building? Not just sewers or soap factories, but trust, safety, a culture where your worth didn't have to be masked in perfume or hidden under powder, a world where health wasn't just for the wealthy, but for everyone with access to running water and a bar of soap. You walk past a hospital, newer, brick-faced, surrounded by a low iron fence. A nurse steps out onto the stoop, her apron clean, her hands gloved. She removes her cap, stretches her neck, and breathes in the night air without flinching. A generation ago, that same hospital might have killed more people than it cured. Now it's quiet, efficient, prepared. Even in the silence, you can hear the echoes of the past, the gurgle of a clogged cesspit, the cry of a child too weak to fight a fever, the scrape of a brush on a stained collar. But now those sounds are fading. The city is still here, still imperfect, still learning. But there are candles in the windows, soap in the stores, pipes in the ground, and pride, not just in looking clean, but in being clean. You come to a final street where a small boy waves goodnight from a doorway. He yawns, wipes his eyes, and disappears behind a curtain as his mother closes the door. Inside, you hear water being poured, bedtime rituals. Outside, the city breathes. You lean against a post, close your eyes, and let it all settle. The dirt, the history, the noise, the smell. It softens, stretches, quiets itself. Because here, at the end of your long walk through grime and lavender, you're left with something simple. The understanding that every basin, every scrubbed floor, every bar of lye-smelling soap was an act of hope. And somehow, even in the filthiest corners of history, hope was always the cleanest thing of all. So now, dear listener, it's time to let the night take over. You've walked every muddy alley and marbled hallway, stood in the steam of bathhouses and the stench of chamber pots. You've watched surgeons operate in blood-stiff coats and mothers cradle fevered children with calloused, unwashed hands. You've heard the cough of the coal worker, the splash of waste in the gutter, the hush of a nurse lighting a lamp in the dark. But now all of it is falling quiet. The streets are hushed, the soot has settled, and the echoes of scraping brushes, clattering boots, and whispered remedies have softened into a kind of stillness. You can almost hear the warm water running through brand new pipes in someone's modest home. You can imagine the weight of a clean towel folded neatly at the foot of a bed. And somewhere, not far from here, a window is left cracked open just enough for the scent of soap and lavender to drift into the room where a little girl is being tucked in for the night. Her face is clean. Her fingers are still wrinkled from her evening bath. And in her sleep she stirs, not from discomfort but from dreams. Let your own thoughts begin to slow now. There's nothing left for you to do. No basin to scrub, no bonnet to powder. No chamber pot to carry carefully into the night. You are not in that time. You are safe and clean and still. Let the weight of everything soften like steam curling from a teacup or warm water slipping through your fingers. Breathe in, breathe out, sink deeper into your bed. Let the world fall away. Let your body remember peace. Sleep now, sweet one. The past is behind you, and the water runs clear.